Welcome to Following, a weekly podcast where we will discuss how to follow Jesus. Christianity is not an event you attend, it's a life you live. Join us each week as we dive into the intersection of real-life circumstances and the life-changing Word of God. Come, follow Jesus with us. Hey, welcome back to Following. We're excited to get into this conversation today. We're not reading from a text to start off with things because we're going to do something a little bit different. Yesterday, Andy preached the sermon, and he's here with us today. Say hi to the listeners, Andy.
Hi to the listeners.
So we brought Andy in because he's smart and intelligent, and he covered everything in his sermon yesterday.
I'm also really good at pretending to be things I'm not really.
So there's nothing else to talk about for the sermon.
Sure.
No, we want to discuss something that we've been talking about the last few weeks with the political situation we find ourselves in, and specifically in Missouri. And there's other states that had an abortion amendment on their ballots as well. But ours succeeded, and so the abortion ban was overruled, unfortunately. And so we kind of wanted to address that because it's clear that politics is not going to be the answer to solving this, at least not yet. Something else has to happen before we can get to that point. You guys agree with that? Disagree?
Well, yeah, I agree. I don't think ever politics is the solution. I think politics is a means by which we can be salt and light.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can influence laws and influence policies from a Christian worldview.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same way, you can't trust in chariots and you can't trust in horses. You can't trust in politicians and in human laws and policies to do everything that needs to be done.
Yeah. Yeah, and so kind of the first question that I have for you guys is, so if we want to address this problem that we have, this devaluing of human life to the point where we're willing to murder our own babies in the womb, if we want to get to the root issue, we have to understand kind of how we got here. And so maybe you could help us out. How did we get to the point where we're at today, where we value personal autonomy and personal freedom so much to the point where we're willing to murder babies?
I don't know that there's nothing new under the sun. This idea of complete selfishness leading to the willing extermination of other human beings is something that's been happening for millennia.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we're just more sophisticated in our killing. You know, in the ancient Roman world, they would just take babies out to the dump and leave them in the garbage to expose them to death and let them die.
The ancient Canaanites burned their infants alive to Moloch.
Yeah. So, and that's just babies. That doesn't count the Holocausts and the genocides that have happened throughout human history, whether you're talking about China, or whether you're talking about World War II with the Jewish people, or, you know, so there's all kinds of examples throughout history of people valuing themselves at the expense of other people. And when you worship yourself, when you value yourself at the expense of others, you use people as commodities to make yourself happier or more fulfilled. And that, I think that's what we're seeing in our culture as well.
There's an issue of desensitization going on as well. Al Mohler, who has a wonderful podcast, often talks about the law as a teacher. Mm-hmm. And it's very often that a law can be passed, and then over time, people just gradually accept that, well, the law must be right. So the pro-life movement did a very good job over the 50 years that Roe v. Wade was in force of positioning ourselves in a place to be able to overturn it later, and that was successful. What we did not do was counteract the morality of I say morality as in the law as a moral teacher. We didn't counteract the influence that Supreme Court decision had in the minds of other people. So people just kind of got used to it. They accepted the trimester framework, which did not exist before Roe v. Wade. That was a complete invention by the court, and now it's a medical reality. We talk about trimesters in the pregnancy, and we had never done that before a Supreme Court judge decided that we should. So what we didn't, this is a monumental failure of the pro-life movement. Every single state, with I think the exception of 2 that had an abortion initiative on the ballot since Roe v. Wade was overturned, the pro-life position has been defeated.
Yeah.
And the only reason it didn't in the 2 is because in those states they required a higher vote threshold rather than a simple majority. So to go back to what you were saying here, that politics was not the answer, that's borne out in the numbers. So here in Missouri, Josh Hawley, a Republican, and Donald Trump, a Republican, both won very convincingly in the popular vote. And yet Amendment 3, which permits abortion up to the point of birth, also was successful. So
Yeah.
clearly that issue is divorced from whether or not we elect, quote unquote, the right people. So as a pro-life movement, we need to collectively begin to rethink our approach here, because politics obviously is not the answer.
I think the issue too is I've been reading a book called Divine Conspiracy by Dallas Willard, and in it he talks about how behavior follows belief, and behavior reveals belief. And I think what we're seeing here is that what people truly believe about human life is borne out in the way they vote. They do not see the babies in the womb are valuable human beings. They do not see a problem with harming another individual if it benefits me. That my personal convenience is the highest thing that I value, and that is seen in the way that we voted on this issue. And it's a very tragic reality. And so I think the path forward is not going to be by forcing a particular behavior, but it's going to be by changing the belief system, because until the belief system changes, the behaviors won't change. But when the belief system does change, the behaviors will follow. And I think too oftentimes politics is only focused on the external behaviors and not on the belief system. And I think that's where we have to speak the truth in love continuously, over and over again. We have to change the reality of what is believed in this country about babies in the womb, about human life and the dignity of human life.
Yeah, that something you said, Andy, that the overwhelming vote for Trump and Hawley, in contrast to Amendment 3 succeeding, it points to something that's been called Christless conservatism. I don't know if you've heard that phrase. There's a political commentator talking about the election results, and he brought that up. Christless conservatism being, air quotes, conservative Republican beliefs, but there's no fundamental belief in Jesus that's supporting a certain set of political ideas or beliefs that motivate you to put things in law. And so if Christless conservatism continues on the path that it's going down, it'll be nothing more than modern liberalism. It'll continue to grow more and more progressive, like a moderate right, a moderate conservative today. Even 20 years ago would be considered a liberal. You see what I'm saying? Like there's the pendulum keeps swinging one way, and so I think you're right, Phil, that we have to address something other than politics. I mean, not that politics aren't important, and we've covered this already. Politics are important. You should be involved, but what we're saying is that something else needs to be addressed in addition to politics. Something probably even more important than addressing the external politics and laws and amendments and so forth. And so that's kind of where I wanted to shift this question for the last part of this episode is, first of all, what does need to be addressed? What is the root problem? Maybe there's a couple of things. I can think of a couple, but what is the root problem or root belief that people have that lead us to believe what we believe today about life, whether that's preborn or even born people, because this is not an issue that's just with the preborn. We're also seeing this with elderly assisted suicide, the conversations around that. So yeah, what do you think is the root problem, and then how do we begin to sort of chart a path forward in addressing that root problem?
Well, I think one of the big root problems is the complete deification of self. My self is the greatest good. And if others inconvenience me, or if others hinder me from achieving whatever I think is best, then they are expendable. They are they can be eliminated. And I think that selfishness, that self-worship, that you see it in all facets of our society, the fascination with fame and being famous and being worshipped and being praised and being influential, all of these things, it's a focus on self, the need to be affirmed, the need to be appreciated, the need to be celebrated in whatever choices I make, and the complete losing of your mind when others have the temerity to say what you're doing is wrong, what you're doing is sinful. They can't stand that, because their highest source of authority is their own heart and their own desires. They are completely deluded in their own minds at the evil of their own hearts. They do not realize that they are self-deceived slaves of sin. And that is, I think, the biggest problem, is a misunderstanding of sin, a misunderstanding of the human heart and the human desires, and the complete deification of self.
Yeah, I first of all, I would concur that this is an issue of the heart. So that's something that we probably need to address just as a pro-life movement, as Christians, and as a society. It's very prescient today, that being Veterans Day, it's what is it? At this time, it is 59 minutes after the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. That's significant because the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, back in 1919, was when World War I ended. And it ended as a result of a signed armistice, and they scheduled it for that specific time. But the war continued in between the signing of the document and the actual passing of that 1 minute in world history. So there were battles being fought for a war that was effectively over, and people dying for no reason. And the reason, I say no reason, the reason they gave was because they wanted to have one last victory before the war was over. We talked about this in the car. When I say we, I mean my kids and I. We talked about this in the car. How tragic is it that being able to feel a little better about the end of the war was more valuable to these generals than the lives of the soldiers that they sent into the teeth of the machine gun fire? And we're doing the same thing today. How terrible it is that the freedom or the convenience or the power or the future economic earning potential that we might have is more important to us than a life that is growing inside of a womb, which, by the way, also has all of those things to look forward to. So it's clearly an issue of the heart. We value things more than we value people, and we need to be able to communicate that to others, because I hate to admit this, but the pro-abortion side of things has done a very good job of messaging. Yeah. They change the language, they refocus the attention on reproductive rights or on the right of somebody to control their own body. And those things all sound good, all things being equal. The problem is that not all things are equal, because there's another person involved, right? And we conveniently forget about that.
Yeah.
So we need to address the heart, but we also need to address the society, I think, because our society looks different today as a result of this widespread abortion since 1973 than it potentially could have. So, for example, Social Security is about to tank. And you might be thinking, well, what in the world does Social Security have to do with abortion? Well, as a political issue, don't you think it would be a little bit on more solid ground financially, Social Security as a program, I mean, if there were an additional 65 million workers paying into it right now? Because right now we are missing 65 million workers in the workforce because they've been aborted. So just look around and think to yourself, well, how would the world be different today if abortion was illegal? Well, in my estimation, the world would be a lot better. And that's just one example of why. So we need to get to take control of the narrative. We need to be able to demonstrate to people on a heart level, this is worth thinking about. This is worth your attention and worth your ultimate decision. And number two, we need to do the same thing at a societal level and say, this is a real issue that we need to address, and we've been addressing it wrong.
Yeah. I think another aspect to that, of how we're addressing the issue that needs to change, is from Psalm 37. He says here, in the midst of living in a society that is against you and life is hard,
Mm-hmm.
he says, do not fret. The word means do not get angry because of evildoers. Be not envious toward wrongdoers, for they will wither like the grass and fade like the green herb. Trust in the Lord and do good. Then if you skip down to verse 7, it says, rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret, do not get angry because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who carries out wicked schemes. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not get angry, it leads only to evil doing, for evildoers will be cut off. And I think that there's a lot of anger. There's a lot of fretting. There's a lot of doing evil ourselves in response to the evil that is being done by wicked people who think it's okay to murder children. And the Lord is saying, do not do that. It's a specific command. Do not get angry.
Bombing the abortion clinic.
Yes.
Bad.
But also screaming at abortionists and mocking them, and those that the anger and the vitriol that comes forth from Christians is evil itself. Evil, fretting and anger leads only to evil doing, not mostly to evil doing, but only to evil doing, according to the text. But rather we are to trust the Lord and do what is good. We are to entrust this horrible situation over to God. We are to roll it onto God and ask God to bring about vengeance, because vengeance belongs to God. It doesn't belong to us. We're to ask God to bring about justice. We're to ask God to bring about deliverance. We are to effect deliverance as much as we can. But when it gets beyond our abilities, then we have to entrust the situation to God, rest in him, and wait patiently for him to do it. And he will do it.
Mm-hmm.
Justice will be done. Vengeance will take place. No evil gets away with evil. And I think that belief in God's sovereignty and in his providence is also a belief that produces a certain kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do not truly believe God is in control, we get angry, we become envious, we become depressed and despairing. And I think that we have to recognize that own problem in our own belief system.
I share your optimism there that God will ultimately bring this to a conclusion in his good time and according to his plan. I'm also optimistic for additional reasons as well. First of all, as a pro-life people, we have the ability to influence the next generation. And I don't mean this unkindly, but we're the ones having kids.
Yeah.
So if we train them up correctly, our numbers are going to grow in ways that the pro-abortion side does not. So that should lead us to place an increased focus on good parenting according to biblical values. But I'm also optimistic because I forget who quoted this first, but reality is undefeated. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that child inside the womb is a child. Mm-hmm. You can deny that for as long as you want. You can call it whatever else you want, but it doesn't change what it is. And eventually, I am firmly convinced that maybe by the end of my lifetime, but I'm firmly convinced that at some point in the future, we as a society are going to look back on this time in the same way that we look back on slavery. And we're going to think to ourselves, why in the world would we have permitted such an awful, putrid, heinous crime to be perpetuated for decades and centuries against these small children? So I pray that happens sooner rather than later, but I do know that it's one of those two options. Reality is undefeated. People will realize that's what we're doing.
Yeah, that sort of gets to something else that I thought of this morning as I was thinking about this episode. I think that there's, even in Christian camps, maybe you guys disagree, but I think that there is a cultural mindset that children are burdens and not blessings. So I was just curious. I googled how many verses are there in the Bible that describe children as being blessings. And the first result was 100, a list of 100 verses. So it wasn't even like all of the. It was just 100.
They quit counting once they hit triple digits.
Yeah. And so we have to cultivate this. We have to build a new culture. I think that sees that children truly are blessings. We all of us here have kids. I've got one of my own, and having my firstborn son completely changed my entire outlook on everything in life.
Mhm.
And it really made this conversation more real to me. And it's sad to me that even Christians will put off having children till later in life. They'll maybe one or two. And I'm not saying that there aren't complications. This is a broad generalization. But there needs to be a rediscovering of children as genuine blessings, instead of burdens, instead of financial burdens. Because I think that's kind of where we're at, and I think that's like if the church the church is pro-life, if the church is pro-life, and we believe that children are valuable, but we don't believe that they're blessings like the scripture says that they are, we won't contend for a view that truly holds that all children are worthy to be protected even in the womb. So how do you think we can I guess rediscover this culture of believing that children truly are blessings, and so having more children? Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we've been talking about, is behavior follows beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to instruct with love in the truth, and reality, as Andy said, is on our side. The truth is on our side.
Yeah.
And so we consistently and continually speak the truth in love. And I think we keep teaching the next generation. We keep preaching the words of Scripture. We keep pushing the narrative that is true, that is right. Does that mean we don't vote when these things come up? No, we do. Does that mean we don't, as some of us are gifted in law and in politics, that they should try to make law? No, we should definitely do those things. Mm-hmm. But we should the most important thing is to consistently speak the truth in love.
Yeah. And
pray for God to change hearts. I think so many times we devalue prayer because we don't think it does anything. But prayer is the most important activity a Christian can participate in, because prayer is verbalized faith. Mm-hmm. Prayer is us calling upon the God who can do whatever he wants to act in this particular situation. So what should we be praying for? We should be praying for hearts and minds to be changed by the truth. We should be praying for abortion clinics to be closed. We should be praying for revenue streams for this facility of death to be dried up. We should be praying for corruption to be exposed and held accountable. We should be praying for God to raise up leaders of integrity. We should be praying for God to change the cultural mindset on human life. Mm-hmm. Be specific in your prayer. Be continuous in your prayer as you speak the truth in love. And I think what will begin to happen is you will see that change. That's what it means to be salt and light in this culture. And so I think we have to do that. But another thing that's just as important is to stop participating in that which continues to promulgate this devaluing of human life. Stop entertaining yourselves with that which devalues human life. When we continue to promote an entertainment industry that treats human life as commodities, when we continue to buy and sell products that are purchased from slave labor in other countries, we are devaluing human life. And it's like Andy said a minute ago, we are prioritizing stuff over people. And the only way to begin to move the needle is to withdraw our participation in that. Stop giving our money to those things, whether it's entertainment, whether it's more stuff, and find ways to create a value of human life, to protect human life from beginning to end.
Yeah. Well, we should probably start wrapping this episode up. So, Andy, do you have any final thoughts or final charges you'd like to give the listeners?
Yeah. So, as a church, and I mean like the Catholic Church, small C Catholic, universal, we need to place an increased emphasis on our own family services. We ought not leave that up to the government. We need to organize and mobilize in order to help parents, especially single moms, be successful in that role. Because it's one thing to say you shouldn't abort your child, and it's good and right to say that, but that's not the end of the issue, is it?
Yeah.
So helping parents and families be successful parents and families, that has to be a focus of the church. Being able to bring in those who need a home to ours, that's important as a church. Phil, you have been a stalwart figure in our church regarding adoption and the need of care for orphans. That is a tremendous example. We need to continue to do that. My wife and I, we're working toward that in this moment as well. We want to follow in that same path. So being able to do more than just say abortion is wrong has to be a part of the equation. Yeah. And then we need to do a good job with our kids. My children are getting old enough now that I can talk to them about political issues, and we talked about. I printed out a sample ballot from Macon County, Missouri, and I took it home and we looked it over together. And I told them that there's an amendment into the Missouri State Constitution that would allow mothers to kill their babies before they're born. And that was legitimately shocking to them, which it should be.
Yeah.
And I concluded that by saying, your mom and I have always wanted you. There was never a time that we did not want you. And kids need to hear that. And if they hear it themselves, then they are going to be that much closer to being able to grow up and value the blessing of children in their own lives, and to be able to do more good in the world.
Amen.
Yeah. Phil, you got anything?
I agree with Andy. I think we need to care for the orphans among us. I think that's what true religion is, caring for the orphans and widows in distress and keeping yourself unstained by the world, James 1:27. So practically loving others like Jesus, looking out for the helpless, looking out for the needy, and doing what we can with those right in front of us is absolutely essential. Speak the truth in love, pray earnestly, and rest in the Lord. He is sovereign and He is in control, and He wins in the end.
Yeah.
And so we cannot lose our hope, even in the face of a political defeat like this. God is still in control, and we must trust Him.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thanks guys for joining us. Special thanks to Andy for being here. We appreciate you coming on and
always glad to be here.
Yeah. So we just encourage you to keep fighting, keep praying for this issue, keep teaching and pushing the narrative that children are a blessing, that life is important, regardless of what state it's in. And until next week, keep following Jesus. Thanks again for tuning in to Following. We truly hope you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful. If you did enjoy this episode, we'd ask that you go and hit the follow button and share this podcast with your friends and your family. If you'd like to hear more on this text, visit the link in the description and you can watch or listen to this sermon on this text. For more resources like this, go to hopeformacon.com. Until next week, keep following Jesus.